Hello, everyone. So my name is Annie. I'm an architect collaborating with Xu Tiantian's office DnA architecture. She couldn't be here today, but we are very grateful for being here and being part of this discussion. And probably you know our studio for the projects in Songyang, in Fujian, Toulouse, the projects about quarries, but today we want to show one of our latest projects and probably the one that is the least architecturally conventional project. So the project is on Meizhou Island, which is the birthplace of the Goddess Mazu, which is the goddess of the sea and the protector of fishermen, of sailors, and of the coastal communities. And the island is really famous for its Mazu temple. Mazu was a young woman that was living in the Song dynasty, and she sacrificed her life to save the others. And with the years, she became really worshipped, not only in China, but also in the Southeastern Asia. And each year, the island is getting around 3 million of visitors doing the pilgrimage to the temple. But unfortunately, they all go to the north part of the island, where the temple is located. And the other 11 villages that are on the island are not really getting the attention and the influx of tourists. Sometimes people might go also in the good seasons to the Golden Beach that is on the eastern side of the island, and some of them might visit the National Reserve Park, but generally the other communities are not getting all the benefits of these visitors. So we were invited by the local administration to design a museum, a central iconic museum building that would attract some tourists and become another destination. And the museum would promote the culture of the island and its rich history. But after we really looked into the local communities, the ecological resources of each of the sites, after we discovered the rich marine ecology and the aquaculture of the island, we proposed to change the brief, and we designed 6 small interventions, all spread around the island, to create a loop. And this way we could distribute the tourists, and also the places, the interventions that we do would become community spaces for the villagers themselves. So the first project that I want to introduce is on the eastern side of the island that is located offshore towards the ocean. This is an area where the villagers are cultivating kelp, oysters, and also fish farming. So these are the bamboo structures, bamboo platforms that the villagers are using for cultivating kelp, and they attach to them cages and also empty bottles, and this way the platforms are floating. And these other structures are the fish farming structures, really not stable to walk on, but this is how the current aquaculture situation is. So what we did with our project, we did a research and we discovered that when we combined the fish, kelp, and oyster aquaculture all together, this could bring to a symbiosis and we could really contribute to making the ocean water cleaner. So the project became actually a platform with a combination of kelp, of oyster and fish cultivation, and this way we could also stabilize the whole structure. We introduced another additional level of accessibility of platforms for people to walk on, to study the aquaculture in place and to really witness it instead of going to a museum. And what is very interesting for us in this project, that the water actually became the foundation of the building itself. And maybe what is beneath the water is for us even more important than what stays above for the people. And the next project, when we continue our journey on the island, is about water management. The island itself, it has no natural rivers, which means that from the ancient times, surviving without the water and reusing the water resource was very crucial for the villagers. So on this image, you can see these circular small ponds, which are filtration wells. And from the ancient times, the villagers would use these ponds and together with some aquatic plants to filtrate the rainwater, to clean it and to use it for irrigation. The drawback of this system was, though, that they could use it to irrigate the trees, but not vegetable plants. So what our project did, we looked into the context and we discovered that there is an adjacent vegetable farm, one of the 2 remainings on the island, which was getting abandoned because of the lack of water. So what we could do, and what we did, we built a new water infrastructure around the existing one. with, again, natural, but more sophisticated and modern technology, which could help to filtrate the water, the gray water, the wastewater, the rainwater, to the stage that we could use it to irrigate the vegetables. And so the architecture itself became just the extension of this water infrastructure. And it became also a place where people could come, could raise their awareness of the water management systems, but also a place for leisure, for meetings, community gatherings, and education. And the vegetable farms, and we also built around a melon shed, a space for cultivation, but also a space that could be used for people to have outdoor classes. And now we are passing to the western side of the island, and this side is facing the mainland. So all this area that you can see in the bay is actually a mudland, and it's very affected to the tides. So every 6 hours there is the high and low tide. And when it's the high tide, the area is completely flooded, but when it's low tide, the area is becoming a mudland. And we were lucky to discover here in this area mangroves plantation. So before the coast, this part of the coast was completely covered by mangrove forests. But with time, villagers starting to do the fishing practices, and with time, the forests degraded. And today there is a big need to restore the mangrove populations because they are really useful for coastal protection, and they are bringing more biodiversity and also helping to avoid floods. So there is the general policy in China, but also in our island, to restore the mangrove plantations, to replant them. But it's really difficult because it takes a lot of time. So we actually discovered on the site trees that were around 2 meters tall or less, but the age was 15 years. So this is a process that also requires a lot of scientists to come to visit the place and to study it. So our first idea was to use these 2 small buildings that you see that were abandoned, to reuse them for the researchers. So buildings really human-centered. But after we'd done the project, after everything was done, we encountered the problem with the ownership of the land. So this project was put on hold. And actually, this became a good opportunity for us to rethink what we could do better. And maybe it shouldn't be so human-centered. We had a lot of conversations with our scientists, with the mangrove scientists. And at the end, we understood that we could just reuse the resource that was there. So these 2 that you can see are 2 abandoned fish ponds. They were abandoned because they were polluting the landscape. But we spoke with our mangrove researcher, and we understood that if we combine this fish cultivation with mangroves, these ponds could actually become bases for biodiversity enrichment, and the species could coexist in symbiosis. So our project here is really minimal. We just refurbished, renovated the fish pond walls, and we also introduced walkways for researchers and students to be able to access this area and to see it, to study the plants in place. So here you can see this minimal intervention that we did is actually just applying, putting in place the stones and adding some stairs. And the rest is fully given to the nature. And you can see how the area changes during the high tide. You practically cannot see the second pond, while with the low tide, it submerges again. Following our journey, the next area is where we have the communities that are cultivating seaweed. And the structures for seaweed are really beautiful, are really fascinating. And we also discovered that before the seaweed gets to these structures, it is actually incubated. The baby seaweeds are incubated in this type of buildings together with oysters, and they stay like this for 8 months submerged into the water. And we found this really interesting. So what we did was to reuse the existing incubators and also to add to them a new building, which would be really designed around this cultivation incubation area and would become additional functions for education, for classrooms, for work, and also for leisure, like a cafe. So people could really witness this process, but also this production place could become a community space. And of course, people inside of this space would also have these surreal views on the seaweed cultivation structures. We also experimented in this part in our architecture with the materials, and you can see here a mock-up of the stone wall. The stone is local, and we are also using the oyster shells as the component for the mortar. Next project is going back to the mudland, going deeper into the ocean. We have an area where the local villagers are cultivating oysters, and these are fascinating structures, very simple. These are just masonry walls that are put into the mud, and the oysters are attaching to them during the high tide, and when the tide is low, the villagers have a couple of hours to come to this area and to collect the oysters. So here what we did, we just added a walkway, a circular walkway that attaches to the existing road and allows people, visitors, to come to walk around in the middle of the ocean to see both this oyster cultivation, these reeds in the water, and also the island in the middle. And this subtle layer of accessibility is something that was our role as architects, because generally we see this space as architecture that was already existing with these high and low tides. And of course, also here we experimented with the materials. We are using the oysters for the part of our walkway, and we are also using the fish cages as elements that are delimiting this walkway, that are indicating the circular pathway. You can see that construction is now in progress, and it's really fascinating that people have only a few hours during the day. Of course, they need to be guided to get to this walkway, but they can really experience this firsthand, much better than in a museum building. And this is the project with the low tide. Almost completed the construction. And finally, we are arriving to the point where our journey is concluding. We are back to the northern part of the island, where the fishermen usually arrive after their workday. So this is the area where they dock their boats, they come to the cliff, and from this area you can also see the Mazu temple. And for us, this is a place where the fishermen, the aquaculture meets the rich heritage of the island. And we decided to have here an intangible heritage square, a public space where people could share their experiences, where visitors could meet the locals, where cultural events could take place, and also where fishermen could have rest. And in this case, our project, our architecture, is just a pavilion, a canopy that we are adding to the existing cliff. So we took the existing stone as the existing architecture as the walls of our building, and we added a simple canopy with a layered roof that is resonating with the Mazu temple. And yes, you can see how simple is the intervention in this case, how minimal it is, because we really think that when we look into the existing resources, there is already enough in place, and we should really try to value and reuse, adaptively reuse whatever we find on site. And with this, I think that's it. And now I'm going to show you a small clip of a film that the Canadian Centre of Architecture did for our project. It is called Into the Island, that is part of their groundwork series. And I really recommend you to find later the full film. It's going to be streamed in a few days, starting from now. Thank you.
Basically, I knew nothing before visiting Meizhou Island. The local fishermen bring us to this seaweed incubator. And it's also used for washing seaweed after the harvesting. For the local people, this is very ordinary, very common facility on the island. But for me, it was really an incredible moment to see such a beautiful structure built with this local stone and standing next to the ocean. with the silent space growing the baby seaweed underneath the still water.
不到有70-80斤吧，这有水里面就那么重，没有的话就一般就30-40斤就这样。
So instantly this becomes the inspiration for a new seaweed incubator on the same location. So if we want to open this facility to public, we need to reinforce all the structure or to build a new facility. And our idea is really to present this incubator just as its original form.
The space becomes an opportunity to reintroduce the culture, the heritage of seaweed incubator. It's also an understanding of how fishermen make a living in a certain scale, can also bring a new circulation and economic potential to the village community.
When we talk about the physical architecture, it's always about the control of accessibility. Fishermen come to the mudland to cultivate oyster and capture crabs or fish.
It's basically an ocean farm.
哎，这就是它那个鱼笼，对吧？
The fishermen can come in during the low tide to pick the oyster and to bring them back to the market before the tides rise again. This is already like a daily routine for them.
这个涨潮的话，海水能涨到多高啊？
这里都看不见的。
就多会有2米吗？1米、2米？
那倒是，哦，不止3米有的，那个石头到那个石头堆。
You know, we constantly build. We find any reason to build, to continue building everywhere. We never question about the necessity for building, for architecture.
Being on the mudland, it's totally changing my understanding, my perception, and also my approach towards architecture.
It opens up my mind that maybe it's not necessary to make a building at all. With the design, you can bring people through this very special walkway to the center of the ocean, to understand the cultivation and also to appreciate the landscape.
Every place you ended up making a kind of physical architecture museum, it's not needed.
On a site like this, actually, this is already a live museum. It's an open museum.
To be honest, I have no criticism on whatever at the background. I just really appreciate everything.
So we collect all these recycled pillars for oyster cultivation and position them as a circle around this small island. Everything is from the site.